to Providence Public Library tonight. We're really excited you all are here. I'm Kate Wells, I'm the Rhode Island Collection Librarian, and I want to welcome you to another program in our 3-month celebration of music in Rhode Island called Don't Stop the Music. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about what you're about to see, so bear with me. But I want to give you some context and background information about what an operetta is, why we're showing this, why we're deciding to put this on. So I'll give you a little bit of that, and you will be able to see some photos kind of recycling through as I talk. So we do have a lot of other programs, classes, events, and activities happening now through the end of June. Maybe you've been a part of some of the events we've already had leading up to this. We'll still be going through June 30th, and if the library is open, we probably have something happening. It's chock-a-block full on the calendar. And definitely take some time to come back and visit our exhibition downstairs from the Rhode Island room. It's a fantastic exhibition of 20th century music in Providence, with items from our collection as well as loans from the Rhode Island Music Hall of Fame, the Rhode Island Historical Society, the Providence Federation of Musicians, and several private collections. And I also want to point out that just as you're leaving, if you haven't had a chance to look at the table with the sales items just outside the door, we do have a limited edition poster done by a local artist that highlights the timeline of development of music in Rhode Island, as well as some t-shirts with the Don't Stop the Music logo and some library pins with images from our special collections. So with that, we're really excited to introduce you to tonight's performance of John Archer's The Romany Maid. So this came about because last year the collection of Archer music manuscripts was processed, digitized, and made accessible to researchers for the first time in the Rhode Island Collection. And this year, as we started to plan our celebration of music with Don't Stop the Music, we hoped there would be a way to increase awareness of John Archer's works, as well as to draw attention to the rich musical and theater history of Providence. So we were really excited when Opera Providence thought it would be a fun project to bring this particular performance to life again. It's been 101 years since it was last performed in Providence, last performed at the Providence Opera House in 1914. So we're celebrating. Incredibly, along with several unpublished musical manuscripts by John Archer for other various light operas and popular music compositions, there is a photographic scrapbook of the original production of The Romany Maid that survived, and you'll be able to see some of the photos as they kind of rotate through, as well as items from our Rhode Island photograph collection that show you sort of what the original cast of characters, the costuming, and the scenes were like for audiences 100 years ago. So, who is John Archer? So, John Benjamin Archer was born in North Andover, Massachusetts in 1872 and came to Providence by way of Detroit and Fort Wayne, Indiana in 1913, where he had been musical director and organist with a number of different organizations. And once here in Providence, he conducted the Choral Arts Society and organized the annual Providence Festival Chorus. He was the organist and choir master at the Beneficent Congregational Church just down the road. During World War II, he served as the musical director at Fort Devens. And along the way, he authored a number of works, many of which were performed across the country as well as here in Rhode Island. And after a long career in music, he passed away in 1954 and is buried in Swan Point Cemetery. So, since operetta has really fallen out of style, I wanted to give you a sense of what an operetta is, what it is you're in for. So, otherwise known as comic operas or light operas, they began in France in the mid-19th century and were adapted from the grand tradition of opera as entertainment for a popular audience. So, as opposed to the high art of opera, operettas catered to public taste. They were performed in public theaters as opposed to opera halls. And they were usually performed with a number of consecutive performances and expected to show a profit rather than be a piece of artistic work. They typically featured very elaborate plots and humorous dialogue and almost always ended very happily. So unlike sort of the grandness of traditional opera, comic operas were unpretentious and generally lighthearted, comedic, satirical, and very sentimental. So by the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, there's a good deal of similarity between the type of audience that would see operetta as well as who would go to vaudeville performances. Both sort of thrived on sentiment and frivolity, really catering to the working and middle class audiences, really meant to be sort of just a fun night out. So while vaudeville was sort of a set of disparate acts, comedy, music, dance performances, and often a tad risque, operetta provided more of a complete story and was considered family-friendly entertainment. The music was composed to be played by a theater orchestra as opposed to a symphonic orchestra, so you get a real difference in terms of, again, the sort of high opera experience versus more popular operetta. And the goal really was for the audience to learn the tune. They wanted people to walk out humming and then go buy the sheet music. So another way to, make a profit. The performers were known first as singers and then second as comedians and actors. And the chorus was a central part of the action, not just a support to the principals. The centers for operetta initially were Paris, Vienna, and London through the turn of the century and up to World War I. And additionally, with the sort of style of Gilbert and Sullivan coming out of England, were made popular in the 1880s in America. But it wasn't until post-World War I that New York was considered a principal operetta city in addition to Europe. The popularity of comic opera meant that the craze literally swept America. Traveling troops would tour the country, performing at a very wide array of venues. You could catch very popular national performances almost anywhere. The first light opera performed in Providence was actually the summer of 1879, when there were two dueling outdoor performances of Gilbert and Sullivan's HMS Pinafore. So the first was performed by White's National Band at the Sans Souci Garden Pavilion, which was on Federal Hill, now sort of right about where Route 95 is. And the other was by David Wallace Reeves' American Band in Roger Williams Park. And this latter production was far more grandiose and very popular. So what's kind of amazing about this performance is they literally built a full-scale replica of the HMS Pinafore and floated it in the middle of Roger Williams Pond. Audiences sat on the surrounding banks just down below the casino, and a 28-piece orchestra, and a company of 100 performers, including U.S. Navy sailors who manned the boats and the rigging of the ship, performed daily for 13 weeks to sold-out shows of over 4,000 spectators. It was really popular. I kept advocating that maybe we should have made this show a little bigger. Maybe we needed our own ship, but that was a little hard to coordinate inside the library. So Providence Theater heyday really ran from sort of just after these productions, 1879 to 1880s into the 1920s, with a lot of theaters downtown here in Providence, some of which they're still working theaters, as well as in Pawtucket, Woonsocket, Newport, all had active theater communities. Several of the most prominent theaters were owned by Benjamin Franklin Keith and Edward Franklin Albee, who were interested specifically in promoting polite vaudeville, that's what they called it. So performances that were fun but family-friendly, and essentially places where you could bring your wife. In sort of 19th century manners, that would have been really important, especially because downtown Providence had an array of burlesque venues and what they called leg shows, as well as sort of more of the stock companies like the Empire Theater, which is now Trinity Red. So there was a really wide array of different kinds of entertainment that you could get here in Providence. The majority of professional productions were produced and performed by traveling companies of actors and singers, but the theaters themselves maintained full-time orchestra conductors and musicians. They managed their own lighting, and they maintained a stock of standard sets. So most of the theaters hosted several seasons catering to different audiences throughout the year. So some which would include dramatic acting, plays, concerts, comic opera, and vaudeville. So you might have a winter season of vaudeville and a spring season of operetta. In 1902 and 3, the Albee Light Opera Company held full seasons of productions at Keith's Theater, which was previously the Lowe's Opera House. And they did 4 to 5 weeks of popular national shows. And they shared the theater with the Dramatic Stock Company as well as the Vaudeville Company. It just became too many actors and singers and sets to kind of keep coordinated in one theater. So unfortunately, the Light Opera Company didn't last more than a couple of years. And by 1914, when the Romany Maid was actually produced, most of the theaters downtown had begun converting to showcase silent film. So you start to see the sort of down swell in popularity of operetta But still, it was happening across the board nationally on a very sort of popular scale. The major theaters that are still downtown by 1914 are the Providence Opera House, which was on Dorrance Street, right where the Johnson Wales Library is now. A photo of the Providence Opera Company Opera House went by. The Empire Theater, which is now Trinity Rep, right across the street, and the Gaiety Theater, which is now the original Gaiety is demolished, but EPAC took its place. So those were still the major theater venues. And comic opera remained really popular, although instead of being performed by these traveling professional groups, it was often performed by semi-professionals and amateur local troupes. So Archer's performances of the Romany Maid are an example of that. The productions often use professionals for the main parts and then local talent for the secondary parts and chorus. The Romany Maid was performed in Providence in May and June of 1914 by The Players, which was a local amateur theater group at the Talma Theater and Providence Opera House. But when I say local amateur theater group, you have to remember that this was very well funded. They were high productions with very elaborate costuming and sets. It included a cast of 122 people who participated in the production, which was a full double cast so that they could rotate performances. And so it was even still really popular by 1914. By about the 1930s, you start to see operetta really start to disappear from the theater landscape as it's replaced with the rise of talkies or movies with sound, and also the shift towards the creation of the modern American musical. So there is a real change in the theater landscape by about 1930. But for 75 years, operetta was considered to be the most popular theater attraction in both Europe and America. So what you're going to experience tonight is just a taste of what audiences 100 years ago would have enjoyed. So we would have loved to have done the really elaborate scenery. I would have loved to have brought in a boat or something. But we wanted to give you a sense of what the experience was like. Unfortunately, the full script of the Romany Maid no longer exists as far as we know. So we worked with Opera Providence from a set of vocal and piano scores. So to understand the plot, we had to rely on programs and theater reviews that were included in the photograph album and scrapbook. So here's the basic plot. The Romany Maid is set in the Napoleonic era, which is 1800 to 1815 in Europe in the Pyrenees Mountains. The hero, Pietro, is the only son of Don Miguel de Hernando. He's traveling with his father and his father's ward, Lola, on their way from Spain to Paris. Along the way, their cart breaks down in the Pyrenees on the border between France and Spain in front of the Customs House Inn, which is run by Frau Kirschwasser. I'm probably butchering that. Upon meeting a group of Romany gypsies, Pietro runs away from his father and joins them. And although Pietro had been initially promised to his father's ward Lola, he falls in love with Pepita, a gypsy girl who flirts with him mercilessly and captures his heart but refuses to marry him. Complications ensue, including a serenade, an abduction, and the involvement of the vivandiers, who are the French soldiers of light infantry. And of course, at the end, things end in a happy manner. So written prior to the outbreak of World War I and performed literally just, I think, 2 months before officially World War I kind of opens, the stock characters would have been really familiar to contemporary audiences of operetta. Most light operas, even in America, took place in Europe, and plots often included either the rise or fall to wealth and upper class. The location of the Pyrenees Mountains, which is the natural border between France and Spain and known for steep mountainsides and numerous waterfalls, would have allowed for very lavish stage scenery and social backgrounds, which in this case is a mix of Spanish noblemen, French soldiers, German housewife, and Romany peasants. So all of this mix creates a real dynamic for comedy and drama. The other thing the audiences at the time would have been familiar with was the depiction of the Romany people as stereotypical gypsies. Many famous operas and operettas have utilized gypsies as stock characters. And especially in contrast to 19th and early 20th century moralism and Victorian prudishness, gypsies would have represented sensuality, freedom from repression, and wildness. So one of the lessons from this particular story is that in choosing Pepito, Pietro rejects the standards of Spanish society and embraces what would be considered the exotic or the primitive. You'll notice one of the songs, The Way of a Man with a Maid, which is sung by Pepita as lead, directly references our commonplace stereotypes of gypsies as fortune tellers and card readers. So that would have been really familiar to audiences at the time as sort of a stock character in opera. Other stock characters that they would have already anticipated would be a pair of young lovers who suffer trials and tribulations before a happy union. So in this case, that's Pietro and Pepita. Usually that pair of young lovers, the hero and the heroine, were indicated by a leading soprano and a baritone, which I'll have to defer to Renee, but I hope probably the case. They would have also been really familiar with the character of the perky soubrette, who is a vain, mischievous, light-hearted coquette, and almost always a mezzo-soprano. So in this case of our story, it's Lola. There would have been a foolish old man who opposes the lovers and tries to get in their way, and or a nobleman who behaves badly. In the story of the Romany Maid, that would have been Pietro's father, Don Fernando, who I don't believe we actually have in tonight's performance as a separate character, but in the full storyline had a pretty strong presence. And a comedic buxom beauty. So for this performance, that's the Frau. She's quite funny. And the other aspect of operetta that was really common were sort of dance numbers, especially drills. So the idea of a chorus made up of soldiers was very common, as well as you'll see the dance numbers with the gypsy girls in the chorus as well. So we're really excited to see this 100-year-old piece of sheet music brought to life by Opera Providence. We really hope you're going to enjoy the performance, and I want to get you onto the show. We do need to do a little transition here with staging, so while we do that, feel free to grab another glass of wine. And while we're doing the transition, I'm going to introduce the art and musical director for Opera Providence, Renee de la Garza, who will tell you a little bit about what they're about to do.